She sat on a public bench with a book in her hand, not a weapon, not a protest sign, just a high school girl doing homework. But a white woman called the cops anyway. And moments later, Amira Jennings was in handcuffs. In court, she stood alone, no lawyer, no family, just her voice. And a notebook. When a white cop grabbed her in front of the judge, the room went silent. But one man in the back stood up and shattered the silence forever. Who was he? And why did the whole courtroom fall quiet when he said 5 simple words? If this made you pause, like this video, share it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories. Now let's go back to that bench in Roosevelt Park. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. 16-year-old Amira Jennings just wanted to finish her chapter. It was one of those soft gray afternoons when the sky looked like it had forgotten how to shine. Roosevelt Park was nearly empty on the north side, the side with freshly trimmed hedges, new benches, and signs politely reminding visitors to pick up after their dogs. No loud music, no skateboards, no second chances. That's where Amira sat, her backpack by her feet, a book in her hands and a pencil resting against her temple. She wasn't playing. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't even moving. Just reading. Quiet. Focused. Until the woman showed up. White, mid-50s blonde bob like a helmet. The kind of woman who didn't ask questions, just assumed answers. Her little dog barked twice, but the leash was taut, and so was her smile. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she said, squinting. "Are you lost?" Amira looked up, polite but firm. "No, ma'am." The woman's eyes drifted from the book to Amira's skin, then to the edges of her shoes, dusty from the walk across town. "This area's for local families, you know. It's meant to be peaceful." "I'm not bothering anyone," Amira replied, the words slow and careful. "Well, you're not exactly what people expect to see on this side of the park," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Just saying." She walked off before Amira could say more. 12 minutes passed, then the patrol car rolled up. It didn't park by the entrance like usual. It drove right up onto the walking path. A statement, not a question. Out stepped Officer Valerie Kemp and Lieutenant Dean Halvorsen. Crisp uniforms, unreadable faces, and no urgency. Just certainty. Valerie didn't greet Amira. Didn't ask for ID. Didn't even say hello. She just stood there staring down at her like Amira had broken something invisible. "We received a complaint," Valerie said. "Said there's someone loitering." "I'm not loitering," Amira replied. "I'm reading." Halvorsen crossed his arms. "Where do you live?" "About 2 blocks down, off 8th and Maple." "That's not this neighborhood." "It's close enough," Amira said, trying not to sound defensive. Valerie stepped closer, her voice colder than the wind. "This side of the park is for residents. That means people who belong." "I didn't know reading required permission," Amira said. Valerie smiled, thin and tired. "You can read somewhere you're allowed." Amira closed her book slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You're making people uncomfortable. Because I'm black." Valerie tilted her head. "Don't play that card. It's not about your skin. It's about behavior." "I've been sitting here, quietly." Halvorsen cut in. "You can either move along or we move you along. Your choice." "I have a right to sit here." Valerie reached out. "Don't touch me," Amira said, standing up, voice shaking now. "I haven't broken any law." "Then why do you sound guilty?" "Because you're treating me like I am." At that, Valerie turned Amira by the shoulder. Without warning, without resistance, she snapped the cuffs on. Amira gasped. Across the path, a man in jogging clothes froze. A woman with her toddler looked away. Another man adjusted his earbuds and pretended he didn't hear a thing. Amira's voice cracked as she asked, "What are you arresting me for?" Valerie didn't answer. She just leaned in and whispered, "This is what happens when you push into places that weren't built for you." Halvorsen added, "Don't worry, you'll be out soon enough. But maybe next time you'll think twice about what side of town you settle into." Amira's book lay face down on the pavement, its spine bent, its pages catching the wind. Her backpack was still unzipped. Her pencil had rolled under the bench. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the shame burned in her throat, hotter than anger, louder than fear. They walked her toward the patrol car, cuffs tight wrists, red dignity unraveling with every step. Nobody said a word. Not the woman who had made the call. Not the neighbors she passed every day on the way to school. Not even the park signs that said, "Welcome to Roosevelt, a place for all." That day, the bench said otherwise. And Amira Jennings learned that in some neighborhoods, Silence is louder than sirens. She arrived early, though her hearing wasn't scheduled for another 30 minutes. Amira Jennings stepped out of the elevator alone, her school bag hanging off one shoulder, her face calm, but her grip on the strap too tight to ignore. No parent, no lawyer, no one trailing behind her to whisper reassurances or smooth her way through what lay ahead. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. People barely noticed her as she passed a 16-year-old girl walking into a world built to swallow girls like her whole. She paused for a moment outside Courtroom 3B, took a deep breath, and entered. It was colder inside than she expected. Lieutenant Halvorsen was already seated, legs crossed casually like he had nothing to prove. Officer Valerie Kemp stood by the rail, arms folded, eyes scanning Amira like she didn't belong in the room, let alone deserve to speak in it. Valerie's lip curled just slightly as Amira walked past her. That look didn't need words. It said enough. You again. Judge Langston entered 2 minutes later and took his seat without looking up. His voice was flat as he began. This hearing concerns Incident 2023-481B. Charges include obstruction of public order and refusal to comply with lawful instruction. He said her name without emotion, like reading a grocery list. Amira opened her notebook, carefully flipping to the page she had prepared. She had written down the sequence of events exactly how they happened, and had even copied part of a city ordinance to explain why she had done nothing wrong. She wasn't even sure he would let her read it, but she needed something to hold on to, something that was hers. The moment her hand went into the bag, Valerie's voice cracked like a whip. Hands where I can see them. Before Amira could look up, Valerie stormed forward, grabbing the girl's wrist with both hands and yanking her out of the chair. A sharp gasp echoed from somewhere in the room. Amira stumbled forward, knees hitting the floor hard. Her notebook dropped beside her. A page floated out and landed near Valerie's boot. Everyone froze. For the second, it was like the room had lost its oxygen. Valerie stepped back, fists clenched. "You don't pull things out in court without permission," she snapped. Especially not kids who already showed they don't respect law and order. Amira tried to push herself up, her lip cut and trembling. Halvorsen muttered under his breath, loud enough for the room to hear. "Told you they always play innocent until it's time to perform." Amira stayed down, eyes on the ground, as Judge Langston finally looked up, not in concern, but irritation. "Is there a reason this courtroom is turning into theater?" he said dryly. A folded paper near Valerie's foot caught the light. Someone in the gallery leaned forward to read the handwritten sentence scrawled in block letters. "Justice is a mirror. It reflects what we ignore." It hung in the air like a verdict, and then a small voice broke the silence. A little boy sitting 2 rows behind Amira leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Why did that lady hit her? She didn't do anything." The mother didn't answer. She held her son tighter and looked away. No one stood up. No one objected. The officers returned to their seats like nothing happened. Amira, still kneeling quietly, picked up her notebook and that one folded page. She looked around the room, not for sympathy, but just to know if anyone else had seen it happen, really seen it. They had, and still, nothing. That was the moment something shifted behind her eyes. It wasn't rage. Not exactly. It wasn't defeat either. It was something deeper, more dangerous for people like Valerie Kemp. Amira wasn't going to shout. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to remember. Every word, every glance, every silence. She rose slowly back to her feet, and the room, whether it knew it or not, had just changed. She didn't cry. Not when she hit the floor. Not when the back of her head knocked the polished wood. Not even when the metal badge on Valerie's chest pressed down against her collarbone like a warning that said, "Stay small, stay quiet." Amira pulled herself up slowly, lips trembling not from fear, but from restraint. Blood slipped from the corner of her mouth, thin and dark like a secret, but she didn't reach to wipe it. Instead, she let it speak for her. Let the room see what silence had cost her. No one moved. A bailiff near the door averted his eyes. Someone in the back row cleared their throat but stopped midway through as if embarrassed for having made a sound. No one said a word, not even the judge. Halvorsen leaned toward Valerie, his voice low but not low enough. She's learned her lesson now. Valerie didn't bother lowering hers. They always do. cry a little, look innocent, and suddenly they're the victim. The word they lingered in the air, bitter and bold. Amira heard it. Everyone heard it. But no one challenged it. The courtroom door creaked open. A woman stepped in, tall, sharp-eyed, and quiet in her steps. Her name was Marcy Grant, court-appointed public defender. She was supposed to have been there at the beginning. She wasn't, and she could feel it the moment she entered. The tension was so thick you could almost see it hovering like heat. She took one look at Amira and stopped in her tracks. The girl's braids were slightly undone from the fall. Her face was composed but bruised, her lip split and bleeding. She stood alone, holding a crumpled notebook to her chest like it was armor. Without a word, Marcy crossed the courtroom and placed a steady hand on Amira's shoulder. "You still want to speak?" she asked gently. Amira nodded once, voice low but firm, now more than ever. Across the aisle, Valerie folded her arms, watching with that familiar mixture of contempt and confidence. "She's just a kid," someone in the gallery whispered, but Valerie scoffed. "Doesn't matter how old they are. They push the line, and when you push back suddenly, you're the villain." Halvorsen laughed under his breath. "They always look surprised when we do our job." Marcy turned slowly toward them. She said nothing. Not yet. In the far corner of the room, a man sat silently. Older. Black. Dressed simply, but with presence. He hadn't been noticed before. He hadn't made himself known. But now he looked at Amira in a way only a father would. Not with panic, not with pity, but with something quieter. A knowing. A stillness that didn't shake even as the room trembled under its own shame. Amira saw him. She didn't flinch. Valerie rolled her eyes, whispering to Halvorsen again. "Here comes the drama." Amira heard that too. But instead of responding, she bent down and picked up the notebook that had slipped from her hands. Its corners were bent, its pages messy. One sheet was still lying near Valerie's boots. She stepped over it like it didn't matter, but Amira bent and picked that one up too. It was the page with the quote she'd copied down that morning. Her handwriting was crooked from writing on her lap, "Justice is a mirror. It reflects what we choose to ignore." She didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to. Back in her place, Amira stood upright, taller somehow than before. Judge Langston cleared his throat. "We'll resume in a moment," he said, his voice lacking conviction. He didn't address the blood. He didn't ask about the fall. He didn't call for a recess to ensure the minor was okay. He just looked at his notes like the papers in front of him mattered more than the girl who had just been assaulted in open court. Marcy turned to Amira again, her voice lower now. "You don't have to speak if you're not ready." But Amira answered without hesitation. "I wasn't ready when I came here, but I'm ready now." A pause filled the room. Someone in the gallery, a young boy maybe 8 or 9, turned to his mother and asked the question no one else dared to say aloud. "Mom, why did that cop hurt her?" "She didn't do anything." The mother pulled him close and shushed him, but she didn't deny it. The question lingered, not just for the boy, for everyone, for Valerie, for Halvorsen, for Judge Langston, for every silent witness who sat by while a black high school girl bled at the feet of a white officer, and no one called it what it was. Amira didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stood breathing steady with blood on her lip and fire in her eyes. And somehow, in that moment, the quiet was louder than anything that had come before it. The courtroom settled into a strange stillness after the break, but it wasn't the calm of resolution. It was the kind of quiet that happens before a storm, tight tents and waiting to break. Valerie was the first to speak, not with apology, not with regret, but with certainty. The kind that only comes from years of knowing your badge weighed more than someone else's truth. She said she had acted for the safety of those around her. Her behavior, she claimed, had been erratic and unpredictable. She didn't look at Amira when she said it. She didn't have to. The words were carefully chosen, practiced, and vague enough to sound legitimate. Dangerous enough to sound familiar. Judge Langston didn't blink. He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, as if the logic of what Valerie said required no further examination. His silence didn't surprise anyone. It was the kind of silence that had followed Amira for most of her life. Then Halvorsen stepped forward. His voice was calm, almost casual. "These incidents, they follow a pattern," he said, eyes grazing the gallery. "Young people today often challenge authority, especially when they come from environments where respect isn't emphasized." The word environments sat heavy in the air. No one needed it explained. He didn't say black. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what he meant. Marcy, still standing beside Amira, raised her hand. "Objection, Your Honor." She said, her voice crisp but not loud. "That's a generalization with racial implications and no basis in evidence." Langston gave a half shrug. "This is a hearing, not a trial. Let's move forward." Marcy's jaw clenched. "Then, for the record, I want to state clearly, there were no legal grounds for Miss Jennings's detention or for the use of force that followed. She posed no threat, made no aggressive moves, and was engaged in a lawful activity when officers approached her. What happened was not a misunderstanding. It was an abuse of power." She paused. "And if we don't call it what it is, it'll keep happening." Amira stood still beside her, her notebook pressed lightly against her side. She hadn't opened it since the fall. She didn't need to. The pages were already written in her bones. The back door of the courtroom creaked open again, but this time no one noticed. A man stepped in quietly wearing a pale gray shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show the veins in his forearms. He didn't wear a tie, he didn't wear a badge, he didn't speak. He simply walked to the last row of seats and sat down. His presence didn't cause a stir, not yet, but Amira felt it. She turned her head slightly, eyes scanning the gallery. And when they landed on him, everything inside her paused. "That's him. That's my father." Her heart did something strange. It clenched not in fear, but in recognition. There was no nod, no wave, no gesture to confirm what she already knew. Just the quiet weight of someone who had waited for the right moment to be seen. He hadn't come to rescue her. He had come to watch. He's not here to fix it. He's here to witness it. That's what I needed. Not someone to take over, but someone to see it all and believe me. Amira's fingers tightened on the spine of her notebook. She could feel the words still lingering in the air. Valerie's distortion, Halvorsen's poison, Langston's indifference. All of it swirling heavy, meant to shrink her down again. But something about knowing her father was watching, not with pity, not with panic, but with that still gaze of his, it changed something. It didn't take the weight off her shoulders, but it reminded her why she was standing. Valerie cleared her throat and spoke again. "Respect for authority is learned, and unfortunately it's something some communities still struggle with." There it was, thinly veiled, dressed up in professionalism, but it landed like a slap. Amira didn't move. She just stared at the judge now, watching his expression carefully. There was no outrage, no surprise, just a quiet acceptance that told her everything she already suspected. You hear it, you know it's wrong, but you'd rather protect your peers than protect the truth. A hand brushed her elbow. Marcy leaned in. "You're doing great. You don't have to say anything yet." But Amira shook her head gently. "Let them talk." Marcy hesitated. Why? Because the more they talk, Amira whispered, the clearer it becomes who they really are. Her voice didn't carry far, but her father heard it. He didn't smile. He didn't nod, but his posture shifted just slightly. A breath let out through his nose, slow and deep. It was the kind of gesture Amira had seen all her life, whenever he recognized someone was stepping into their own strength. The judge looked at Marcy. "Do you have anything else to present?" She replied calmly. "Not yet." Langston gave a curt nod and turned to his file. Amira glanced down at her notebook fingers, tracing the folded edge of the page that had been crumpled on the floor earlier. "Justice is a mirror. It reflects what we choose to ignore." She lifted her eyes again. Valerie was still standing, her chin high, her gaze smug. Halvorsen had leaned back now, hands in his pockets as if everything had gone exactly as planned. And Langston, he wasn't looking at any of them. He was reading something in his notes, pretending not to notice the tension he'd allowed to fester in his courtroom. But Amira, she noticed everything, and for the first time that day she didn't feel alone. The courtroom held its breath as Amira stood. Not a single shuffle, not a cough, not even the sound of someone adjusting in their seat. Just the slow, deliberate rise of a girl who had been dragged, shamed, and silenced, and still chose to stand. She walked to the witness stand with a grace that didn't belong to someone so young or someone so bruised. Her lips still showed a faint cut from earlier, but she didn't touch it. She didn't flinch. She simply placed her hands on the wooden rail and looked straight ahead. "I was sitting on a bench, reading a book. That's it. That's all." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the calm before a storm, the kind of calm that comes after you've already decided to stop asking for permission to be heard. Judge Langston shifted slightly but gave no comment. I didn't yell. I didn't resist. I didn't threaten anyone. I was just there, until someone decided that me being there was too much. She glanced briefly at Valerie, who didn't bother hiding her contempt. The officer leaned back, smirking with one eyebrow raised like she had heard all this before. Amira continued. And then I was told without explanation that I needed to leave. That I wasn't welcome. That I could read somewhere I was allowed. I asked why. I really did ask that. And then hands were on me. Then metal. She raised her wrists slightly. There were no cuffs on them now, but the invisible outline lingered. I sat on a bench, not a bomb. That sentence settled like a thunderclap. The room didn't move. Even the courtroom stenographer hesitated, fingers still on the keys. Valerie gave a low laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Kids lie better than adults these days, she muttered just loud enough. Marcy turned her stare, slicing through the room like a warning, but she didn't bite. Not yet. Amira stayed focused. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't ask what I was reading. They didn't even ask my name. They just saw me. And that was enough. She paused, then added quietly. And when I reached for my notebook, they thought I was reaching for danger. Marcy stepped forward, now calm and clear. Your Honor, we request the court subpoena, the city park surveillance footage from the time of the incident. The cameras near the bench would show exactly what took place, the exact distance, the posture of all involved. This is a matter of factual evidence. Langston didn't blink. That footage is outside the direct scope of this hearing, he replied coolly. We're assessing the officer's response, not revisiting city policy. Marcy didn't move an inch. That footage is the response. You cannot separate perception from reality if you refuse to look at the facts. Officer Kemp didn't act in fear. She acted in bias, and the footage would prove it. Valerie scoffed. Halvorsen folded his arms, muttering something under his breath that didn't carry far, but Amira heard it. So did Marcy. So did the back row. They always think they're the victim, he said. The words didn't spark outrage. They sparked something worse. A silence too thick to breathe in. And that's when a man in a gray shirt shifted quietly in the back row. His entrance had gone unnoticed. No one paid him much mind until now. But Amira turned just slightly. She saw him. Her breath caught just for a second. It was in the way his hand clenched slow and firm, then relaxed as if holding something back. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something deeper. It wasn't fury. It was pain. Dignified pain. The kind that does not ask to be excused or understood. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Because in that glance she remembered who he was. Not just her father, but someone who had taught her to speak when it mattered most and to know when silence says more. Langston tapped his gavel once, a lazy sound. Not to control the room, just to signal a transition. Amira stepped down, but she didn't look defeated. Her steps were measured, shoulders straight. She returned to her seat beside Marcy and folded her hands. The room remained stiff, watching her, unsure if they had just witnessed testimony or a reckoning. In the back, the man in the gray shirt did not clap, did not rise, did not smile. He just watched his daughter and waited. In the moments after Amira sat down, something began to shift. It was quiet at first, barely noticeable, like the weight in the room had subtly tilted without warning. But Marcy Grant felt it, and she moved on instinct. While the judge called for a recess, Marcy leaned closer to Amira and whispered a question. Had there been anything like this before? Any pattern of behavior from Officer Kemp? Amira didn't answer with words. She opened her notebook again, turned to a page near the back, and pointed at a clipped article. No headline, just a timestamp and a few scribbled notes. Marcy read it once, then twice. Her eyebrows tightened. She didn't say much after that. She simply nodded and stood. She spent the next 20 minutes not in the hallway, not on her phone, but deep inside the building's public records room, a place most lawyers didn't bother with unless they were looking for something specific. And Marcy knew exactly what she was looking for. 3 names, 3 complaints, all involving Officer Valerie Kemp, all written by citizens whose cases mysteriously vanished after internal review. 1 was a school teacher. 1 was a sanitation worker. The 3rd had been a teenage boy stopped outside a bus station. All 3 claimed excessive force. All 3 dismissed with no disciplinary action. And every report had a signature at the bottom from one person, Lieutenant Halvorsen. When Marcy returned to the courtroom, she didn't walk fast. But she didn't stroll either. She moved like someone carrying a box of matches through a dry field, carefully, but ready. Outside in the corridor, as they waited to be called back in, Amira leaned against the wall with her notebook tucked under one arm. Her gaze was steady, but her breathing was slow, focused. That was when she heard the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was close enough to hear every word. "You'll cry before this ends." Amira didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even turn to look. She knew the voice. Valerie Kemp had a way of speaking like she was always 2 steps ahead of punishment, as if the system itself bent to accommodate her. Maybe it had. But Amira opened her notebook, slowly pulled the pen from its coil, and wrote something on a fresh page. Her handwriting was careful, every stroke deliberate. "If silence wins, then let mine echo." She closed the book and pressed it against her chest. Marcy watched the whole thing from down the hall. She didn't interrupt. She didn't interfere. She knew timing mattered. This wasn't the moment for arguments. This was the moment before. Inside the courtroom, Judge Langston returned to his seat. Valerie sat down too, with Halvorsen beside her. They shared a few words. Nothing audible, but you could see the smug ease in their posture, like people who had rehearsed this kind of thing before. But Marcy didn't sit. She stood just behind Amira and waited until Langston looked her way. "Your Honor, I'd like to revisit an earlier motion. I have new information that speaks directly to Officer Kemp's credibility and Lieutenant Halvorsen's involvement in prior cases." Langston raised an eyebrow. He didn't like surprises, but something in Marcy's tone made him hesitate. Not enough to show concern, just enough to listen. "It involves 3 dismissed complaints, all filed by civilians, all alleging forceful misconduct by Officer Kemp. In each case, the internal report was signed and cleared by Lieutenant Halvorsen. The pattern is unmistakable." Langston paused. Halvorsen stiffened. Valerie smiled just a little, as if none of this could touch her. But Marcy wasn't done. "The complaints were buried in plain sight. But they exist. And if this court chooses not to review them, it is willfully ignoring a history of abuse masked as law enforcement." There was a shift then, a new kind of stillness, the kind that feels like the second before a gong is struck. In the back of the courtroom, the man in the gray shirt hadn't moved, but his eyes had. He was watching everything now, not just his daughter. The room, the power dynamics, the cracks forming. Amira sat still, but inside something had shifted. This wasn't about proving her innocence anymore. This was about exposing something larger, something uglier. She looked down at her notebook again and pressed her fingers to the page she had just written. She was done being quiet for the sake of comfort. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, and the echo was just beginning. The air was heavy when they reconvened. No one said much. Some avoided eye contact. Others just stared straight ahead, as if hoping silence could erase what had just happened. The echo of Valerie's words from the hallway still lingered somewhere in Amira's ears, but she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Not yet. Judge Langston adjusted his glasses and looked down at his bench, maybe hoping the weight of the morning would settle back into routine. But Marcy remained standing. She didn't sit down after her last objection, and now, with a calm yet deliberate voice, she spoke. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I request that Miss Amira Cross be allowed to address the court directly. Just for a moment." Her own words. Langston raised an eyebrow. He tapped his pen slowly as if to signal annoyance, but he didn't object outright. He looked at Valerie, who responded with the faintest shake of her head and a sarcastic glance toward Amira, but didn't interrupt either. The judge finally sighed. "1 minute, Ms. Cross. Keep it brief." Amira rose without a sound. She didn't rush. Her hand grazed the surface of the table as she stepped forward. Her notebook remained in her seat. This time her voice didn't need pages. "You judged me before I spoke." That was how she started. Soft, unshaken, clear enough for every ear in the room. "You judged me because I was a girl sitting on a bench where you thought I didn't belong, because my skin didn't fit your idea of peace, because my silence made you nervous." There was no outrage in her voice, no trembling, just a steady, grounded truth. And yet that truth cut sharper than any accusation. "I didn't scream. I didn't resist. I didn't even speak until now. And still, I was treated like I had something to hide, like I had already done something wrong just by being there. Sitting, reading. From the clerk's desk came a sudden clatter. The stenographer's pen had slipped from her fingers. She scrambled to pick it up, her cheeks flushed with quiet embarrassment. But the room didn't laugh. It didn't even breathe. Amira continued, I've been taught all my life to stay composed, to be respectful, to trust that if I follow the rules, I'll be safe. But no one tells you what to do when the rules are written in invisible ink. When people smile while erasing your dignity in plain sight. She paused, just long enough for that silence to settle in again. Not an empty silence. A waiting one. The kind that carries a question too heavy to speak. An older man seated in the third row wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. His shoulders slumped forward as if a piece of him had been pulled open and there was no use hiding it now. He didn't look ashamed. He looked relieved that someone was finally saying what he had held in for too long. Amira looked up. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, not searching for sympathy, but making sure her words reached every corner. She turned slightly, almost facing the back. You can lock my wrists. You can throw me to the floor. You can call me a liar, but you can't rewrite what happened. And you can't erase what I've seen. Not this time. Her voice didn't crack. It held, just long enough for the weight of her truth to land again. Behind her in the last row, a figure moved. The man in the gray shirt who had sat still for so long now rose slowly to his feet. He didn't speak. He didn't rush. But his presence shifted something in the room, like a curtain being pulled back just enough to show the storm gathering behind it. Amira saw him. Her eyes didn't widen. Her body didn't turn. But something in her breath steadied as if a silent clock inside her had just struck its hour. No one else knew who he was, not yet, but they were about to. The courtroom didn't breathe. Anthony Jennings walked forward slowly. The sound of his shoes against the polished floor echoed in the silence like a clock ticking toward judgment. Every eye followed him, but none more intently than Amira's. He didn't stop until he stood directly before the bench. His voice was calm but unmistakable. My name is Anthony Jennings. I am the United States Attorney General. A collective gasp swept through the room. Some jaws dropped. Others turned pale. Judge Langston blinked in disbelief. Lieutenant Halvorsen straightened his posture almost reflexively, and Officer Valerie Kemp stiffened like she had just swallowed glass. Anthony didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I sat in this courtroom and watched my daughter be treated like a criminal for reading a book in a public park. I listened while she was belittled. I stayed silent as a test of this court's integrity. And what I witnessed broke something inside me. Amira looked down, overwhelmed. She hadn't wanted this. She never asked him to come. But now, with her father standing there, not just as a parent, but as a national figure, the air around her felt different, stronger. Anthony turned toward her. You didn't need rescuing Amira. What you needed was someone to witness you. And I'm sorry I waited so long to be that witness. The court stenographer dropped her pen. The sound of it hitting the floor felt louder than any gavel. From the back, the old man in the flannel shirt wiped tears from his eyes. Others in the gallery leaned forward, sensing history folding open in front of them. Judge Langston tried to find his voice. Mr. Jennings, this is highly irregular. You cannot just insert yourself into proceedings as a— No, Anthony interrupted, still calm. You let a child stand alone without legal counsel, subjected her to humiliation, denied the viewing of security footage, and allowed officers with disciplinary histories to control this narrative. You made it irregular the moment you turned justice into theater. Valerie's face tightened. This is a misunderstanding. She was being uncooperative. Anthony slowly turned to her. Uncooperative. For sitting on a bench. For reading. For asking questions. Do you know what we call that? Officer Kemp. We call it thinking while black. Valerie's eyes narrowed but said nothing. Lieutenant Halvorsen tried to intervene. Mr. Jennings, if this is meant to intimidate— Anthony stepped toward him. It's meant to expose. To expose the weight of every unspoken bias that walked into this courtroom long before my daughter ever did. A beat of silence fell like a curtain. Marcy Grant cleared her throat. Your Honor, may I formally request that all charges be dropped and the body cam footage submitted into evidence immediately. I also ask that we enter into record the Attorney General's statement. Langston looked like he was shrinking behind the bench. For the first time, the black robe seemed too big for him. He glanced around as if hoping someone else would speak first, but the room was still. He adjusted his glasses and said very faintly, "Motion granted." But Anthony wasn't finished. He turned once more to the room, sweeping his gaze across the faces in the gallery. "I didn't come here to pull rank. I came here as a father, as a man who's tired of watching silence weaponized. My daughter's strength today was never about me. It was about truth, and truth, when spoken from the mouths of the dismissed, has a way of shaking the tallest walls." He turned back to Amira. She stood straighter now. "You didn't fold, Amira. You didn't shout. You stood still when the world wanted you to flinch. And that is power they cannot take from you." She whispered, "Thank you, Dad." He smiled gently. "You did this, not me." Outside the courtroom, the hallway had already begun to fill with reporters. Phones buzzed. Headlines formed. The system had tried to bury a girl with silence, but she answered with clarity. And now, everyone was listening. The first video appeared less than an hour after the courtroom emptied. It was shaky, recorded from a phone held low, but the audio was clear. Anthony Jennings's voice filled the frame, steady and undeniable. "You judged her before she spoke, and you did it because she didn't look like your daughters." By evening, the footage had been clipped, captioned, and viewed over 2 million times. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, and by midnight, it was national. Attorney General defends daughter in courtroom clash read one headline. High school girl stands alone. Then the country listens read another. It wasn't just about a father's reveal. It was about a question Amira had never asked out loud, but which now echoed everywhere. How many other girls sat on park benches and ended up in handcuffs without a camera to bear witness? Valerie Kemp was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Her department issued a brief statement citing protocol, but public pressure mounted too quickly. The mayor's office was inundated with calls. Protesters gathered at City Hall and outside the courthouse. Someone chalked a quote on the sidewalk in white block letters. "If silence wins, then let mine echo." Below it, a name, Amira Jennings. Lieutenant Halvorsen was named in a formal inquiry. Several prior incidents involving his use of force had been quietly settled over the years, but now each one resurfaced with a vengeance. There were whispers of cover-ups, of files altered, of victims silenced under pressure. Judge Langston did not return to the bench the following week. A judicial ethics complaint was filed by a coalition of attorneys citing his refusal to allow evidence, his visible bias, and his failure to intervene during Amira's mistreatment. The robe he had once worn with ease now carried weight he could no longer bear in public. But it wasn't just inside the system where the ripple spread. A group of parents from Amira's school organized a meeting. It started in a church basement, then moved to the library when the crowd outgrew the space. They drafted a letter addressed to the district demanding clearer protections for students of color, better training for staff, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory policing around school zones. It gathered over 500 signatures in 3 days. Amira was called into the principal's office one morning, unsure what to expect. She had braced herself for awkward praise or polite avoidance. Instead, she found the faculty standing in a quiet semicircle around a plaque. It read, "In honor of Amira Jennings, for courage in the face of silence." They offered no speeches, just a moment of stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted inside her. Not pride, not relief. Just a sense that maybe the next girl who sat on that same bench wouldn't be alone. Later that week, a reporter approached her outside her home. Cameras were everywhere now. She could have said no. She almost did. But then she saw the notepad in the reporter's hand. A woman about her mother's age, not holding a mic, but simply waiting respectfully. So Amira spoke. "I didn't want attention," she said. "I wanted protection. I didn't raise my voice because I thought someone would. I thought the rules would protect me. But it turns out silence is only safe if you're the one writing the rules." The clip was played on morning news segments across the country. It didn't go viral like her father's moment, but it lingered, quietly, powerfully. It was the kind of sentence people repeated at dinner tables, the kind that made teachers pause in classrooms and parents sit differently across from their kids. And that was the point. Because the real ripple wasn't just in the headlines or suspensions or letters signed in libraries. It was in the conversations it sparked the questions people dared to ask themselves about how easy it had been to look away. Amira didn't become a symbol because she fought. She became one because she endured. 1 year had passed. The courthouse, the videos, the headlines, all of it had become history. But what lingered wasn't the scandal. It was the silence. The kind of silence that forces people to reflect, to change, to listen. And on a gray morning in Washington, in a room filled with the weight of reform and expectation, Amira Jennings stood at the front of the National Conference on Judicial Accountability. She wore no blazer, no badge, no title, just a plain navy dress and a presence that was impossible to ignore. There was no microphone in front of her, no notes in her hands, just her. The hall had been buzzing moments before with clinks of coffee cups, low murmurs, and the shuffle of paper. But when Amira stepped onto that stage, the room quieted itself as if it too had learned the value of silence. She looked across the sea of officials, reporters, educators, and parents, and began not with a greeting, but with a breath. They told me silence is weakness, that staying quiet makes you complicit. But what if silence is waiting to be heard? Her voice was calm, not loud, but every syllable landed like a heartbeat against concrete, measured, clear, honest. I was called a threat before I even opened my mouth. I was handcuffed before I could ask why. I was told to leave simply because I stayed. Because I read. Because I didn't belong on a bench that apparently had invisible rules. Several faces in the audience dropped their gaze. Others leaned in, listening like they hadn't listened in years. I was told I was disruptive, but I hadn't even spoken yet. I hadn't moved. I hadn't done anything except exist where someone didn't think I should. And that was enough to become a problem. A deep stillness settled into the room, the kind that stretches between people when truth is laid bare. Amira's eyes scanned the crowd again, landing briefly on the section where a row of students sat, wide-eyed and motionless. "I didn't want attention," she said softly. "I wanted protection." Someone near the back cleared their throat, fighting emotion. She let the silence linger, not because she lost her place, but because the pause said what words could not. My father watched it all happen. From the back row, from behind his title. And when he stood, the world listened. But the truth is, I had already spoken. I spoke through restraint, through composure, through not shrinking when they wanted me small. She took a step down from the stage. "Justice doesn't always shout," she said softer now. "Sometimes it waits." She walked the rest of the way down. The applause didn't erupt. It rose like a wave, gathering strength. Not out of politeness, but because something in that room had shifted. Near the exit, Anthony Jennings stood waiting. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He simply placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, a gesture more powerful than any headline that had ever mentioned his name. And in that moment, no one needed to say a thing. Not the judges, not the journalists, not the students, because somehow she had spoken for all of them. Some stories don't need a courtroom outburst or a blazing headline to be remembered. Sometimes all it takes is a girl who refuses to shrink, a father who chooses the right moment to speak, and a silence that echoes louder than a shout. Amira didn't fight back with her fists. She stood her ground with grace, clarity, and an unshakable sense of worth. And in doing so, she reminded us all that real change doesn't always roar. It begins quietly in the courage to stay seated, to stay present, and to be seen. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and reflect, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories, where we bring you powerful, true-to-life narratives that shed light on injustice and celebrate the human spirit. Your support means the world to us. It fuels our team to keep creating stories that matter, stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Because sometimes the quietest voice leaves the deepest echo, and here at Mr. Mac's Stories, that echo becomes our legacy.